The dusty main street of Opal, Wyoming stretched out like a thread of broken promises in the summer heat of 1882, and Kade Rawlins stood at the edge of it with nothing but $17 in his pocket and a future that looked darker than the storm clouds gathering over the distant mountains. He had been back in town for 3 days now, sleeping in the livery stable because he could not afford a room at the boarding house, and every person who passed him on the street looked through him as if he were made of glass. 5 years ago, he had left this place with dreams of striking it rich in the Montana gold fields, with a pretty girl named Sarah waiting for him, and a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the territory. Now Sarah was married to the banker's son. His father's ranch had been sold to pay debts after the old man died, and Kade's only skill seemed to be surviving one more day without starving. The sun beat down mercilessly as he walked toward the general store, his boots worn so thin he could feel every pebble through the soles. He needed to find work, any work, before his money ran out completely. The mine outside town was hiring, but the thought of going underground made his chest tighten with an old fear he had carried since childhood. He had always worked under open sky, with horses and cattle and the wind in his face. As he passed the Silver Dollar Saloon, he heard raised voices and the sound of something crashing inside. He should have kept walking, should have minded his own business like any sensible man would, but something made him pause at the door. "Nobody wants you here, girl," a harsh male voice was saying. "Your time is up. You owe the house more than you'll ever make, and we're done carrying you." "Please," a woman's voice replied, and there was such desperation in that single word that Kade felt it like a physical blow. "Just give me another week. I can work harder, take on more shifts, I will pay what I owe. You have been saying that for months. Pack your things. You are out." Kade pushed through the swinging doors before he could think better of it. The saloon was nearly empty at this hour, just a few men nursing drinks at tables in the corner. Behind the bar stood a heavy man with a florid face and cold eyes, and in front of him was a young woman who looked like she was trying very hard not to cry. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun, and a dress that had once been fine but was now faded and mended in several places. Her face was pretty in a tired way, with high cheekbones and large hazel eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. She stood very straight, her hands clasped in front of her, and Kade recognized that particular kind of dignity that came from having nothing left but pride. "What is going on here?" he heard himself ask, his voice rougher than he intended. The bartender glared at him. "Private matter, Cowboy, move along." But the woman had turned to look at him, and for a moment their eyes met. In that instant, Kade saw something he recognized because he had felt it every day since returning to Opal, the hollow ache of someone who had lost everything and was barely holding on. "How much does she owe?" The words came out before he could stop them, before his practical mind could remind him that he had almost nothing himself. The bartender's expression shifted to something calculating. $200. "She has been working here for 6 months, but she cannot make enough to cover her room and board, let alone pay down the debt. I bought her contract from a place in Cheyenne, and I am cutting my losses." Kade felt his stomach drop. $200 might as well have been 2,000. But he looked at the woman again and saw the way her shoulders had tensed, the way she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. "What kind of work does she do?" he asked. "She serves drinks, cleans rooms, sings sometimes when we have entertainment. She is a decent worker, but she does not bring in enough customers. The men want prettier girls, livelier girls. She is too sad, too quiet, bad for business." The woman flinched at those words, and something hot and angry flared in Kade's chest. He knew what it felt like to be told you were not good enough, that you had failed at the one thing you were supposed to be able to do. "What if someone paid her debt?" he said. "What happens then?" The bartender shrugged. "Then she is free to go wherever she wants." "But I have been trying to sell her contract for a month, and nobody wants her. Like I said, she is not worth the investment." Kade looked at the $17 in his mind's eye, then at the woman's face. She was watching him now with an expression he could not quite read, something between hope and disbelief. "I will make you a deal," he said, the words coming from some reckless part of himself he thought had died in the Montana mines. "I do not have $200 right now, but I am a horse trainer. A good one. You know the wild mustangs up in the high country?" The bartender nodded slowly. "I can catch them and break them for sale. Good horses go for $40, $50 each, sometimes more. Give me 2 months, and I will bring you the money." "And what do I get as collateral?" the bartender asked with a sneer. "You do not look like you have 2 cents to rub together." "You get my word," Kade said quietly, "and you can ask anyone who knew me before I left town. Kade Rawlins always pays his debts." For a long moment, the bartender studied him. Then he looked at the woman and back at Kade. "You want her that bad, Cowboy? I will tell you what. Give me what you have now as a down payment and you can take her. But if I do not see the rest of the money in 2 months, I will send men after both of you." Understood. It was a terrible deal, one that would leave him completely broke and tied to a stranger, but Kade found himself nodding. Understood. He pulled out his small leather pouch and counted $17 onto the bar. It was every cent he had in the world. The bartender scooped it up and produced a piece of paper from beneath the counter. "Sign here. This transfers her contract to you." Kade took the pen and signed his name, feeling the weight of what he had just done settling over him like a stone. When he looked up, the woman was staring at him with wide eyes. "Go get your things," the bartender said to her. "You belong to him now." She hesitated, then turned and disappeared through a door at the back of the saloon. Kade stood there, his heart pounding, wondering what madness had possessed him. When she returned a few minutes later, she was carrying a small cloth bag that looked like it held everything she owned. She walked up to him and stopped, searching his face. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly. Kade realized he did not have a good answer. "I do not know," he admitted. "What is your name?" "Violet," she said. "Violet Darrow. I am Kade Rawlins." "I suppose we should go figure out what comes next." They walked out of the saloon together into the bright afternoon sunlight. Kade had no home to take her to, no money for food or lodging, and he had just committed himself to earning $200 in 2 months with nothing but his skills and determination. It was possibly the stupidest thing he had ever done. But when he glanced at Violet walking beside him, saw the way she held her head up despite everything, he felt something shift inside his chest. It was not hope, not yet, but it was something he had not felt in a long time. The sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to keep fighting. They walked in silence toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland and the mountains rose up in the distance. Finally, Violet spoke again. "You should not have done that. You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or a liar or worse." "Are you?" Kade asked. "No." "But you did not know that when you signed those papers." "I suppose not." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Why do you owe so much money? What happened?" Violet's expression closed off slightly, but she answered. "My father ran a small ranch east of Cheyenne. When he died 2 years ago, I inherited it along with all his debts. I tried to keep it going, but I did not know enough about ranching, and the creditors would not work with a woman. They took the land, the cattle, everything. I had to find work to survive, and I ended up at a saloon in Cheyenne, where they advanced me money for clothes and a place to stay. The debt kept growing faster than I could pay it off. When that owner sold my contract to the man here in Opal, I thought maybe a smaller town would be better. But it was just more of the same. No other family, she shook her head. My mother died when I was young. It was just my father and me for a long time. Kade understood loss. He had lost his own mother to fever when he was 15, and his father had never been the same after that. The ranch had slowly fallen apart, and by the time the old man died, there was nothing left to save. I know what it is like to lose everything, he said. I came back to Opal 3 days ago with less than $20 and nowhere to sleep. That money I just gave up was all I had. Violet's eyes widened. Then why would you spend it on me? That makes no sense. Probably not, he agreed. But I saw you standing there and you reminded me of myself. Like you were barely holding on but too stubborn to quit. I could not just walk away. She studied him for a long moment, and he saw her eyes were shining with unshed tears. No one has done anything kind for me in a very long time, she said quietly. I do not know how to repay you. You do not have to repay me, but you could help me. How? I need to catch and train horses to sell, enough to make $200 in 2 months. That is a lot of work for one person. If you are willing to help, we could split everything 50-50 after the debt is paid. It would give you a fresh start. Violet looked uncertain. I do not know anything about horses. You can learn. I am a good teacher, he paused. But I have to be honest with you, I do not have anywhere to stay and I cannot afford to rent a place. I have been sleeping in the livery stable. We would have to camp out in the high country while we work. So you are saying we would be living outside, catching wild horses with no guarantee that any of this will work. That about sums it up. To his surprise, a small smile crossed her face, the first he had seen from her. That still sounds better than working in that saloon. When do we start? First thing tomorrow morning. Tonight, we can sleep in the stable. It is not much, but it is dry and the stable master will not bother us if I help him with the evening feeding. They spent the rest of the afternoon gathering supplies with credit from the general store. The owner, Mr. Patterson, remembered Kade from before he left town and was willing to extend a small line of credit based on the promise of future horse sales. They got basic camping gear, some food staples, rope, and a few other necessities. It was not much, but it would have to do. As the sun set, they settled into the hay loft of the stable. Kade made a point of giving Violet the cleaner space and keeping a respectful distance between them. She seemed to appreciate that, though he noticed she watched him with a careful wariness that spoke of hard experience. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they sat in the growing darkness, the smell of hay and horses surrounding them. "Sure." "Why did you leave Opal? You said you were gone for 5 years." Kade leaned back against a wooden support beam. "I was engaged to a girl named Sarah. We were going to get married, but I wanted to give her a better life than I could afford on my father's failing ranch. I heard about the gold strikes in Montana and convinced myself I would go make my fortune and come back rich. I was young and stupid and believed in luck. What happened? I spent 3 years in the mines and made barely enough to survive. The big strikes were played out by the time I got there, and the little claims did not pay much. Then there was a cave in that trapped me and 6 other men underground for 2 days before they dug us out. 3 men died down there in the dark. After that, I could not go back into the mines. I tried other work, but nothing paid well. By the time I saved enough to come back here, my father had died and Sarah had married someone else. She sent me a letter saying she could not wait forever. "I am sorry," Violet said, and he could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. "It was my own fault. I chased a dream and lost what mattered." He looked over at her in the dim light. "What about you? Did you ever want to marry, have a family? Once?" "There was a ranch hand who worked for my father. His name was Thomas. We talked about getting married after my father passed, but when the debts came due and the ranch was taken, he left. Said he could not afford to take on a woman with nothing. I have not seen him since. He sounds like a fool. Maybe. Or maybe he was just being practical. The world is not kind to poor people, especially poor women. Kade could not argue with that. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the horses shifting in their stalls below. Finally, he said, "Tomorrow is going to be hard work. We should get some sleep." Kade, her voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah, thank you. Even if this does not work out, even if we fail, thank you for trying." He did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded. As he lay down in the hay and closed his eyes, he thought about the $200 hanging over their heads and the wild horses up in the mountains. It was an impossible task, but somehow having Violet there made it feel less insurmountable. He had lost hope years ago in the darkness of that Montana mine, listening to men die and wondering if he would be next. But maybe, just maybe, that hope was not gone forever. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment to come back. They rose before dawn the next morning, both of them stiff from sleeping on hay but determined. Kade traded some work for a couple of horses and basic tack from the stable master, an older man named Dutch who remembered Kade's skill with horses and was willing to help. The horses were nothing special, just sturdy working animals, but they would serve the purpose. As they rode out of Opal toward the mountains, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold. The air was cool and fresh, and Kade felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. This was what he was meant to do, not working underground in the dark, but out here under open sky. Violet rode beside him with a straight back and steady hands on the reins. She clearly knew how to ride, even if she claimed not to know much about horses. "Your father taught you?" he asked, nodding toward her easy seat in the saddle. "Yes. I have been riding since I was 5 years old. It was one of the few things he insisted on. He said a rancher's daughter needed to know how to handle a horse as well as any man. He was right. You ride well." A slight flush of pride crossed her face, and Kade realized she probably had not received many compliments lately. He filed that observation away, thinking he should remember to notice when she did things well. They rode for several hours into the high country, following old trails that Kade remembered from his youth. The landscape changed as they climbed, becoming more rugged and wild. Pine trees replaced the scrub brush, and the air grew thinner and cooler. By midday, they reached a wide valley ringed by mountains where Kade had seen wild horses before. They made camp near a stream that ran through the valley, setting up their simple tent and getting the fire going. While Violet prepared a basic meal of beans and bacon, Kade scouted the area on foot. It did not take long to find signs of horses. Tracks in the soft earth near the stream, droppings that looked fresh, areas where the grass had been heavily grazed. There was a herd here, maybe 15 or 20 animals. If he could catch even 5 or 6 of them and train them well enough to sell, they would be well on their way to making the money they needed. When he returned to camp, Violet had food ready and coffee brewing over the fire. They ate in companionable silence, both of them tired from the long ride. "Tell me about catching wild horses," Violet said as they cleaned up after the meal. "How does it work? First, you have to find the herd and study them for a few days. Learn their patterns, where they drink, where they graze, who the dominant stallion is. Then you set up a trap, usually a funnel made of rope and brush that leads into a corral. You drive the herd toward the trap and hope they run into it instead of breaking away. Once you have them contained, you start the real work of gentling them and teaching them to accept a saddle and rider. How long does that take? Depends on the horse. Some are naturally calmer and learn quickly. Others are more stubborn. A good horse trainer can have an animal ready to sell in about 2 weeks if he works with it every day. Violet considered this. So if we catch 6 horses, and it takes 2 weeks each to train them, that is 3 months of work at minimum. Unless we work with multiple horses at the same time, which is what I plan to do. It is harder that way, requires more attention and skill, but we do not have the luxury of time. What do you need me to do? For now, help me build the trap and learn to watch the horses. Later, once I have some of them gentled down, I will teach you how to work with them. The more hands we have on this, the faster it will go. They spent the rest of that day and all of the next constructing the trap. It was back-breaking work, cutting saplings and dragging them into position, stretching rope between trees, building a makeshift corral strong enough to hold frightened horses. Violet worked as hard as Kade did, never complaining even though he could see her hands were getting blistered and her shoulders ached from the unaccustomed labor. On the 3rd day, they spotted the herd. Kade and Violet lay on their stomachs on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching the horses graze in the early morning light. There were 18 of them, a mix of bays, chestnuts, and grays. The dominant stallion was a magnificent dark bay with a white star on his forehead. He kept the herd together with an iron will, constantly circling and watching for danger. "That one," Violet whispered, pointing to a smaller chestnut mare standing slightly apart from the others. "She looks gentler than the rest." Kade followed her gaze and nodded. "Good eye. She is probably young, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Less set in her ways. She would be a good one to focus on for training." They watched for several hours, noting the patterns. The horses drank from the stream around mid-morning, then moved to the shadier areas to rest during the heat of the day. Late afternoon, they grazed again before settling in for the night near a cluster of rocks that provided some protection. "Tomorrow," Kade said as they made their way back to camp. "Tomorrow, we try to drive them into the trap." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Violet asked him more about his time in Montana. It seemed like she was trying to understand who he was, this stranger who had bought her contract and brought her into the mountains on what might be a fool's errand. Kade found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about the mining camps, the desperate men searching for fortune, the hard winters and the constant danger. He told her about the cave-in, about lying in the darkness with the weight of the earth pressing down, convinced he was going to die there. "What kept you going?" she asked. "In those 2 days underground, what made you hold on?" He thought about that. Stubbornness, mostly, and the other men. "We talked to each other, kept each other's spirits up. There was one man, an old-timer named Gus, who told stories the whole time. He made us laugh even when we were terrified. He was one of the ones who died, right near the end. He just closed his eyes and stopped breathing. I think he had been holding on for the rest of us, and when he heard the rescue crew getting close, he finally let go. That is heartbreaking." It was, but it taught me something about hope. Gus had it right up until the end, even when things looked impossible. He believed we would get out, and that belief kept us all alive longer than we might have survived otherwise. Violet stared into the fire. "I lost hope for a while," she admitted. "When I was working at that saloon, seeing the same walls every day, serving drinks to men who looked through me like I was not even human. I started thinking it would never get better, that I would die there owing money I could never repay." "What changed?" "You walked in." I know that sounds dramatic, but it is true. I was planning to leave Opal that night, just walk out into the wilderness and disappear. I could not face another day of that life. Then you showed up and did something so unexpected, so incomprehensible that it shook me out of my despair. Kade felt a tightness in his chest. She had been that close to giving up, and he had stumbled into her life completely by accident. "I am glad I walked in when I did." So am I. She looked at him across the fire, and there was something in her eyes he had not seen before. Not just gratitude, but a kind of cautious warmth. I do not know if we can pull this off, Kade, but I want you to know that you have already given me something valuable. You made me feel like I was worth saving. You are worth saving, he said firmly. Do not ever doubt that. They sat in silence for a while longer, the fire crackling between them and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Kade thought about hope and second chances, about how sometimes life gave you exactly what you needed at exactly the right moment. The next morning, they put their plan into action. Kade positioned Violet at one end of the valley with instructions to stay hidden until he gave the signal. Then he circled wide around the herd, approaching from the opposite direction. The key was to spook the horses just enough to get them moving, but not so much that they scattered in all directions. Kade waited until the herd was in the right position, grazing near the path that would lead them toward the trap. Then he stood up, waved his hat, and shouted. The reaction was immediate. The stallion's head shot up, nostrils flaring. He let out a sharp whinny and the herd exploded into motion, racing away from Kade's position. They ran as a group, the stallion herding them, pushing them in the direction Kade had hoped they would go. At the far end of the valley, Violet stepped out at just the right moment, arms wide, and the horses veered away from her, funneling toward the trap. Kade ran after them, shouting and waving, keeping the pressure on. The lead horses saw the funnel of ropes and brush, hesitated for just a moment, then plunged through into the corral beyond. The rest of the herd followed, including the stallion. Kade sprinted the last 100 yards and slammed the gate shut behind them. They had done it. They had actually caught the entire herd. Violet came running up, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. We did it. I cannot believe we did it. Kade was breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through him. That was perfect. You timed it exactly right. Inside the corral, the horses were milling around nervously, the stallion challenging the fence and snorting his displeasure. Kade knew they would need to let most of them go, keeping only the ones that looked most promising for training. Over the next hour, they carefully separated out the horses they wanted. They kept 5 mares and 1 young gelding, choosing animals that looked sturdy and healthy with good conformation. The rest, including the aggressive stallion, they released back into the wild. Now the real work would begin. Kade started with the young chestnut mare that Violet had noticed. Her name would be Copper, he decided, for the reddish tint to her coat. He spent hours just sitting in the corral with her, not approaching, just being present so she could get used to his smell and presence. Violet watched from outside the fence, observing everything he did. The first rule of horse training is patience, he explained. You never want to force them or scare them more than necessary. You want them to choose to trust you. How do you make them choose that? By being consistent. By rewarding the behavior you want and ignoring the behavior you do not want. By never losing your temper or being cruel. A horse has a long memory, and if you hurt them or frighten them badly, they will never fully trust you. Over the following days, Kade demonstrated his techniques with Copper. He got her comfortable with his touch, first just a hand on her shoulder, then running his hands over her body, picking up her feet, handling her ears and mouth. Each step was slow and deliberate, giving her time to accept each new thing before moving on. Violet proved to be a quick learner. She had a natural gentleness with the horses that surprised Kade. While he worked with Copper, she started working with one of the other mares, a quiet gray they named Silver. She copied Kade's methods, and within a few days, Silver was following her around the corral like a pet dog. You have a gift for this, Kade told her one evening as they watched the horses settle in for the night. Have you really never worked with horses before? Not like this. My father had ranch horses that were already trained, but I like working with them. They are honest, you know. They do not pretend to be something they are not. If they trust you, they show it. If they are afraid, they show that too. Unlike people. Unlike people, she agreed. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn. Work with the horses all morning. Break for a simple lunch. Work again in the afternoon, and then evening time by the fire where they talked and got to know each other better. Kade learned that Violet loved to read but had not owned a book in over a year. That she could sing beautifully, but hated doing it on command in the saloon. That she had wanted to be a teacher before her father died and everything fell apart. Violet learned that Kade had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable. That he was haunted by the men who died in the mine, particularly old Gus. That he had never really loved Sarah the way he thought he had. That it had been more about the idea of having someone waiting for him than about her specifically. They learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and movements. When Kade needed an extra pair of hands to hold a nervous horse, Violet was there. When Violet struggled with a stubborn mare, Kade knew exactly when to step in and when to let her figure it out herself. And slowly, almost without noticing it happening, the way they looked at each other began to change. It started with small things. The way Kade's hand would linger on Violet's shoulder when he was showing her a new technique. The way Violet's eyes would follow him when he was working in the corral, admiring the confident, capable way he moved around the horses. The way they started sitting closer together by the fire at night, their shoulders almost but not quite touching. One evening, about 5 weeks into their time in the mountains, a storm rolled in. They had been watching it build all afternoon, dark clouds piling up over the peaks. When the rain started, it came down in sheets, driven by a fierce wind. They huddled in their tent, which was barely large enough for 2 people, listening to the thunder crack overhead. The horses were nervous, moving restlessly in the corral, but there was nothing to be done except wait it out. Water started leaking through a seam in the tent, dripping onto Violet's blanket. Without thinking, Kade pulled her closer to his side of the tent, wrapping his own blanket around both of them. She came willingly, pressing against his warmth. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just listening to the storm. Kade was acutely aware of her body against his, the smell of her hair, the way she fit perfectly under his arm. His heart was beating too fast, and he wondered if she could feel it. Kade. Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the sound of the rain. Yeah, I am glad it was you. In the saloon that day, I am glad it was you who walked in. He tightened his arm around her shoulders. I am glad too. She tilted her head back to look at him, and in the dim light filtering through the tent, he could see her eyes searching his face. Can I tell you something? Anything? I think I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying. Kade's breath caught in his throat. He knew he should be careful, should think about all the reasons this was complicated. They were stuck together by circumstance and debt. They had only known each other for a few weeks. She might just be feeling grateful, not actually in love. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw the same thing he was feeling. The same growing certainty that this was not just proximity or gratitude or loneliness. This was real. I think I am falling in love with you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed her whole face. What are we going to do about that? Instead of answering with words, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them half afraid the other would pull away. But then she kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and it deepened into something that took Kade's breath away. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. Violet rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "I was so lonely for so long," she whispered. "I forgot what it felt like to be close to someone." "Me too," Kade admitted. "I have been alone since I left Opal, even when I was surrounded by other people in the mining camps. But with you, I do not feel alone anymore." They kissed again, and this time there was less hesitation, more certainty. When they lay down together under the shared blanket, wrapped in each other's arms, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The storm raged outside, but inside the tent, they created their own shelter, their own warmth. They talked and touched and kissed until they both fell asleep, tangled together in a way that spoke of trust and growing love. When Kade woke the next morning with Violet in his arms, the sun was streaming through the tent, and the birds were singing. He watched her sleep for a moment, studying the way the light caught in her auburn hair, the peaceful expression on her face. Something deep inside him that had been broken for a long time felt like it was starting to heal. She stirred and opened her eyes, and when she saw him watching her, she smiled. "Good morning." "Good morning," he replied and kissed her forehead. They emerged from the tent to find the world washed clean by the storm. The air was fresh and cool, and everything seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. The horses were calm now, grazing peacefully in the corral. As they went about their morning routine, making breakfast and checking on the animals, there was a new easiness between them. They touched more freely now, small casual contacts that spoke of intimacy and affection. A hand on the small of her back as he passed, her fingers brushing his as she handed him a cup of coffee. The training progressed well. Copper was ready for her first saddle, and Kade walked Violet through the process of introducing it slowly, letting the mare get used to the weight on her back before attempting to ride. Silver was right behind, and the other horses were coming along nicely as well. But as good as things were going, Kade could not forget the deadline hanging over them. They had been in the mountains for almost 6 weeks now, which left them only 2 more weeks before the debt came due. They had 6 horses in various stages of training, but none of them were ready to sell yet. He did not mention his worries to Violet, not wanting to dampen her happiness, but she was more perceptive than he gave her credit for. "You are thinking about the deadline," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "How did you know? You get a crease right here when you are worried." She reached out and touched the spot between his eyebrows. "We are going to make it, Kade. The horses are doing well. Another week and we can start taking them to town to sell." "I hope you are right. I just keep thinking about what happens if we fail." "That bartender is not going to be understanding. Then we do not fail." Her voice was firm, determined. "We have come too far to give up now." Her confidence bolstered him, and he pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "When did you get so optimistic?" 6 weeks ago, you were ready to walk into the wilderness and disappear. 6 weeks ago, I did not have anything to live for. Now I do." The next week was intense. They worked from dawn until well after dark, pushing the horses hard but not too hard, getting them ready for sale. Copper and Silver were both reliable under saddle now, and 2 of the other mares were close behind. The gelding was proving more stubborn, but even he was making progress. On the morning that marked 7.5 weeks since they had left Opal, Kade made the decision. "We are going to take Copper and Silver into town today. See if we can sell them." Violet nodded, though he could see the nervousness in her eyes. Everything depended on whether they could get good prices for these horses. They needed at least $40 each to have any hope of making the full $200 by the deadline. They packed up camp, leaving the other 4 horses in the corral with enough food and water to last several days. Then they saddled Copper and Silver and headed down the mountain, each leading one of the trained horses. The ride to Opal took most of the day. As they approached the town in the late afternoon, Kade felt his chest tighten with anxiety. So much was riding on this. They went directly to the livery stable, where Dutch came out to look at the horses. He walked around them slowly, checking their legs and teeth, watching how they responded to handling. "These are nice animals," he said finally. "Well trained, calm disposition. Where did you get them?" "Caught them wild up in the high country and trained them myself," Kade replied. "In 7 weeks. That is impressive work." Dutch studied him. "You always did have a gift with horses, Rawlins. I will give you $45 each for them." $90. It was a good start, but they still needed more than $100 to pay off the debt. "I have 4 more up in the mountains, almost ready to sell," Kade said. "Can you take those too? If they are as good as these two, absolutely. Bring them down when they are ready." They concluded the sale, and Kade pocketed the $90 with a sense of relief mixed with ongoing worry. They were more than halfway to their goal, but time was running out. As they walked through town toward the general store to replenish their supplies, they passed the Silver Dollar Saloon. The bartender was standing outside, and his eyes locked onto them immediately. "Rawlins," he called out, "you have 1 week left. I hope you have my money." "I will have it," Kade said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "You better. I would hate to have to send my men after you and your girl there." He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Although having her back might not be so bad, I could put her to work in other ways, make back what she owes." Violet flinched, and Kade felt rage flood through him. He took a step toward the bartender, but Violet caught his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "He is not worth it. Let's just go." With effort, Kade controlled himself and walked away, but that encounter lit a fire under both of them. They bought their supplies quickly and headed back up to the mountains that same evening, not wanting to waste any time. For the next 5 days, they worked harder than they ever had. Every waking moment was spent with the horses, refining their training, getting them as ready as possible for sale. They barely slept, taking turns watching the horses and working with them even in the darkness by firelight when necessary. On the 6th day, they brought all 4 remaining horses down the mountain. They were exhausted, dirty, and running on pure determination, but the horses looked good. They had done everything they could. Dutch looked them over and agreed to buy 3 of them at $40 each. The 4th, the stubborn gelding, still needed more work. That gave them another $120. Kade counted the money carefully. 90 from the first sale, 120 from the second sale. $210 total. They had done it. They had actually done it. They walked straight to the Silver Dollar Saloon. The bartender was behind the bar, and his eyebrows went up in surprise when he saw them. "I have your money," Kade said, dropping $200 on the bar. "The debt is paid." The bartender counted it slowly, then looked up with a sour expression. "Looks like you got lucky, Cowboy. Not luck. Hard work." Kade picked up the $10 in change and turned to leave, his hand on Violet's back. "Wait," the bartender called. "I need to give you the paperwork showing the debt is satisfied." He produced a document and signed it with a flourish, then slid it across the bar. Kade took it and folded it carefully, putting it in his pocket. This was proof that Violet was truly free, that no one owned her debt anymore. They walked out of the saloon into the evening sunlight, and Violet let out a breath that seemed to have been held for months. "It is over," she said wonderingly. "I am actually free." "You are free," Kade confirmed. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her right there on the main street of Opal, not caring who saw. When they broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, giddy with relief and exhaustion and joy. "What do we do now?" Violet asked. Kade thought about the $10 in his pocket and the gelding still up in the mountains waiting to be sold. We have choices now. That is what we have. What do you want to do? She looked at him seriously. I want to stay with you if you will have me, if I will have you, he laughed. Violet, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and I do not have much to offer right now, but she cut him off with a kiss. You have everything that matters. You have hope and determination and a good heart. That is more than enough. They spent that night at the boarding house, paying for a real room with a real bed for the first time in weeks. They lay in each other's arms, clean for the first time in days after washing up at the pump behind the building, and talked about the future. I want to start a horse ranch, Kade said. Breed and train horses, build a reputation for quality animals. It will take time and money we do not have yet, but it is what I am good at. I want to help you do that, Violet replied. I am good with the horses too, and I learn quickly. Together we could make it work. Together, he agreed, liking the sound of that word. Over the next few days, they sold the gelding for $35 after another week of work with him. That gave them a small cushion of money to work with. They talked to Dutch at the livery stable, and he agreed to let them work out of his facilities in exchange for a percentage of their sales. It was not an ideal arrangement, but it gave them a place to start. Kade also reached out to the ranchers in the area, letting them know he was available for horse training and breaking. His reputation had suffered from his long absence, but the quality of the horses he had brought down from the mountains spoke for itself. Slowly, work began to trickle in. 3 months after paying off Violet's debt, on a crisp autumn day, Kade and Violet stood in front of the preacher in Opal's small church and got married. It was a simple ceremony with just a few witnesses, but it was perfect. Violet wore a new dress bought with their savings, simple but lovely in dark blue that brought out her eyes. Kade wore his cleanest clothes and could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed her with all the love and gratitude he felt for this woman who had come into his life at his lowest moment and given him a reason to hope again. The next few years were hard but good. They worked constantly, training horses for ranchers, occasionally going back up into the mountains to catch more wild mustangs. They saved every penny they could, living simply but happily. Violet proved to be not just a good horse trainer but an excellent businesswoman. She kept their books, negotiated deals, and gradually built relationships with clients that brought in steady work. Her idea to offer a guarantee on their horses if an animal proved unsuitable for any reason within the first month. They would take it back and provide a different horse, set them apart from other trainers, and built a reputation for reliability. In the spring of 1884, 2 years after they married, they had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land just outside Opal. It was not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it and a rundown cabin that needed extensive repairs, but it was theirs. They spent that summer fixing up the cabin and building a proper barn and corrals. Kade would never forget the day they moved into their home. It was not fancy, just 3 rooms and a stone fireplace, but Violet cried happy tears as they carried their few belongings inside. I never thought I would have a home again, she said, looking around at the simple interior. I thought I would spend the rest of my life in saloons or worse. You are never going to have to worry about that again, Kade promised, pulling her close. This is our home, and we are going to build a good life here. And they did. By the end of that first year on their own land, they had built up a small herd of horses and had more training work than they could handle. They hired a young man named James to help with the daily work, which freed up time for Kade to focus on training and Violet to manage the business side. In the winter of 1885, Violet announced she was pregnant. Kade was overcome with joy and fear in equal measure. The thought of being a father terrified him. What if he was not good enough? What if something went wrong? But the thought of having a child with Violet, of creating a family together, filled him with a happiness he had never experienced before. She must have seen the worry in his face because she took his hands and said, "You are going to be a wonderful father. You are patient and kind and you know how to teach. Those are the important things. What if I mess it up? What if I fail? Then we will figure it out together, the same way we have figured out everything else. We are a team, Kade. We always have been." Their daughter was born on a hot June day in 1886, and they named her Rose. She had Violet's auburn hair and Kade's gray eyes, and from the moment he held her, Kade was completely in love. All his fears melted away as he looked down at the tiny person he and Violet had created together. "She is perfect," he whispered, tears running down his face. "She is," Violet agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Our perfect little miracle." The ranch continued to grow. By 1888, they owned 80 acres and had expanded their operation to include breeding stock. The Rawlins Ranch became known throughout Wyoming for producing high-quality horses, and they had clients coming from as far as Montana and Colorado to buy their animals. But success had not changed them. They still worked hard every day, still treated each horse with patience and respect, still remembered what it was like to have nothing. They were generous with those who were struggling, often extending credit to young cowboys trying to get started or helping out families who had fallen on hard times. One afternoon in the spring of 1889, a young woman came to the ranch. She was thin and worn-looking, with desperate eyes that reminded Kade of the way Violet had looked that day in the saloon 7 years earlier. "I am looking for work," she said. "Any work. I can cook or clean or help with the horses. I do not need much pay, just a place to stay and food to eat." Kade and Violet exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in that glance. Then Violet smiled at the young woman. "What is your name?" "Emma." "Well, Emma, we do need help in the house. I have been trying to manage everything myself, but with a 3-year-old daughter and another baby on the way, I am getting overwhelmed. The job is yours if you want it. We will provide room and board plus fair wages." The young woman's face crumpled with relief. Thank you so much. You will not regret this." "I know we would not," Violet said gently. "Everyone deserves a second chance." After Emma went to put her things in the small room they had built onto the back of the house for hired help, Kade wrapped his arms around Violet from behind, resting his hands on her growing belly. "You have a good heart," he said. "We both do. We know what it is like to be desperate and alone. If we can help someone else the way you helped me, we should." Their second child, a son they named Luke, was born in September of that year. He was a sturdy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by the horses from the moment he could focus his eyes. Rose adored him, constantly wanting to hold him and help take care of him. As Kade watched his family grow and his ranch prosper, he often thought back to that day in the Silver Dollar Saloon, when he had spent his last $17 on a woman he did not know. It had seemed like madness at the time, a desperate, foolish gesture that would probably lead to disaster. But it had been the best decision he ever made. Violet had not just given him hope. She had given him a reason to fight, a reason to believe in himself again. Together, they had built something real and lasting out of nothing but determination and love. One evening, after the children were in bed and Emma had retired to her room, Kade and Violet sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You remember the first night we slept in the hay loft at Dutch's stable?" he asked. "Of course. I was so scared and so grateful at the same time." I could not figure you out, why you would do something so reckless for a stranger. I have been thinking about that a lot lately. I do not think it was reckless. I think it was the only sane thing I had done in years. I had spent so long chasing things that did not matter: gold, money, some idea of success that was never real. And then I saw you, and something in me recognized something in you. We were both lost, both struggling, both holding on by our fingernails. And now look at us, Violet said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them. We have a home, a family, a business we built together. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure it is real. It is real, all of it. And it all started because I walked into a saloon at exactly the right moment. Or exactly the wrong moment, she said with a smile. Depending on how you look at it. If you had walked in 5 minutes later, I would have been gone. If you had walked in 5 minutes earlier, maybe the bartender would not have been throwing me out. Timing is everything. I do not believe that. I think we were meant to find each other. I think all the bad things that happened to both of us, all the loss and struggle and pain, was leading us to that moment so we could save each other. Violet turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. You know what the amazing thing is? You did save me. But I think I saved you too. We saved each other. He kissed her then, soft and slow, a kiss that held 7 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they broke apart, he kept his forehead pressed against hers. I love you, he said. I loved you from the moment you said thank you in that saloon, even though I did not know it yet. I loved you when we were sleeping in hay and eating beans for every meal. I loved you when we were working until we could barely stand, trying to catch enough horses to pay off your debt. And I love you now with everything we have built together. I love you too, she replied. You gave me back my life. You gave me hope when I had none left. You saw me when everyone else looked through me. That is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars came out. Inside the house, they could hear Rose talking in her sleep and the soft sound of baby Luke breathing in his cradle. The horses moved quietly in the barn, settling in for the night. This was everything Kade had ever wanted, even when he had not known he wanted it. Not gold or fortune or some grand adventure, but this. A home, a family, a woman he loved who loved him back, work that mattered, and the simple peace of knowing he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The years continued to pass. Rose grew into a bright, confident girl who could ride before she could walk and had a natural way with the horses that reminded everyone of her father. Luke was quieter but just as capable, and he had his mother's head for numbers and business. Emma stayed with them for 3 years, saving her money, before meeting a young rancher named Thomas and getting married. She and Violet remained close friends, and Emma always credited the Rawlins family with giving her the fresh start she needed. In 1892, Kade and Violet bought the adjoining property, expanding their ranch to 200 acres. They built a larger barn and added more breeding mares to their operation. The Rawlins name became synonymous with quality throughout the territory, and when Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, their ranch was featured in a newspaper article about successful Wyoming businesses. But despite their success, they never forgot where they came from. They donated to the church, helped fund a school in Opal, and were known for giving jobs to people who were down on their luck. They understood that fortune could change in an instant, that anyone could end up desperate and alone through no fault of their own. On a warm summer evening in 1895, 13 years after that fateful day in the Silver Dollar Saloon, Kade and Violet sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Rose was 11 now, Luke was 5, and their youngest daughter, Grace, was 2 years old and toddling around after her older siblings. You ever think about how different our lives could have been? Violet asked. If you had not walked into that saloon, if you had not spent your last bit of money on my debt, Kade thought about it. Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it. The past is past. What matters is what we do with the present. You are right. But I am grateful every single day for the choice you made. You changed the entire course of my life. You changed mine too. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. I was so lost when I came back to Opal. I felt like a failure, like everything I touched turned to dust. And then I met you, and suddenly I had a reason to fight again. You gave me purpose. We gave each other purpose, she corrected. That is what makes us work. We are partners in everything. As the sun set and the children came running up to the porch, tired and dirty and happy, Kade felt a deep sense of contentment. This was his legacy, not gold or money or fame, but a family built on love and a ranch built on hard work and a marriage built on mutual respect and devotion. Rose climbed into his lap, even though she was getting too big for it, and Luke leaned against Violet's legs. Little Grace stood between them, holding onto Kade's knee for balance. "Tell us the story," Rose demanded. "The one about how you and Mama met." It was a story they had heard 100 times, but they never tired of it. Kade looked at Violet and she nodded, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "All right," he said. "It was a hot summer day in 1882, and I had just arrived back in Opal after being gone for 5 years. I did not have much money, just $17 to my name, and I was not sure what I was going to do next. And then you walked into the saloon," Rose interrupted, as she always did. "And then I walked into the saloon," Kade confirmed. "And there was your mother, and she needed help. So I did something that probably was not very smart, but it was the right thing to do." "You paid for her," Luke said solemnly. "You spent all your money." "I did, and it was the best $17 I ever spent." "Because you loved her," Rose said with the romantic certainty of an 11-year-old. "Because I loved her," Kade agreed, meeting Violet's eyes over their children's heads, "even though I did not know it yet." "And then you went to the mountains and caught wild horses," Luke continued the story. "We did. Your mother and I worked harder than we had ever worked in our lives. We camped under the stars. We trained 6 horses in less than 2 months, and we fell in love while we were doing it. And then you got married and bought this ranch and had us," Rose finished triumphantly. "That is exactly right. And every day since then has been an adventure." "Even the boring days?" Luke asked skeptically. Kade laughed. "Even the boring days, because I get to spend them with all of you." Later, after the children were in bed, Kade and Violet stood in the doorway of each child's room, watching them sleep. Rose with her auburn hair spread across the pillow. Luke with his thumb in his mouth, even though he insisted he was too old for that. Grace curled up with her favorite stuffed horse that Kade had made for her. "We did good," Violet whispered. "We did very good," Kade agreed. They walked to their own room, the master bedroom they had added onto the house 3 years earlier. It was simple but comfortable, with a large bed and windows that looked out over the ranch. As they got ready for bed, Kade thought about the man he had been 13 years ago. Broken, hopeless, convinced that he had wasted his life chasing dreams that would never come true. He had hit rock bottom, had nothing but $17 and a stubborn refusal to give up completely. And then he had made one choice, one seemingly foolish decision to help a stranger, and that choice had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked, climbing into bed beside him. "Just how lucky I am, how grateful." "Me too." She snuggled close to him, her head on his chest. "You know what the strange thing is? When I was at my lowest point, when I had lost everything and was working in that saloon, I used to dream about a different life. But the life I dreamed about was nothing like this. It was smaller, safer, lonelier. I could not have imagined something this good because I did not think I deserved it. You deserve this and more, Kade said firmly. You are the strongest, most capable, most loving person I know. Everything we have, we built together. We did. And I would not change a single thing, not even the hard parts, because they led us here. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. The horses moving in the barn, the wind in the trees, the creak of the house settling. These were the sounds of home, of safety, of a life well lived. Kade thought about hope, about how he had lost it in the darkness of that Montana mine and found it again in the desperate eyes of a woman in a saloon. Hope was a fragile thing, easily broken but also capable of regenerating from the smallest spark. All it took was one person caring enough to extend a hand, one moment of compassion in a hard world. He had saved Violet, but she had saved him right back. That was how love worked, he had learned. It was not one person rescuing another. It was two people choosing to face the world together, to lift each other up when one stumbled, to celebrate each other's victories and mourn each other's losses. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Violet replied sleepily. Forever. Forever. It was a promise they had made 13 years ago when they stood in front of the preacher, and it was a promise they had kept every day since. Through hard work and lean times, through the joy of watching their children grow and the satisfaction of building something lasting, through every sunrise and sunset on their little piece of Wyoming, they had chosen each other again and again. As Kade drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms, he felt a profound sense of peace. The struggling cowboy who had walked into a saloon with nothing but $17 and a broken heart no longer existed. In his place was a man who had found everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, and hope. Hope most of all, because hope was what had driven him to spend his last cent on a stranger. Hope was what had gotten them through those hard weeks in the mountains. Hope was what had built this ranch and this family and this life. He had lost hope once, buried it in the darkness of a collapsed mine shaft along with the bodies of good men who had run out of chances. But Violet had helped him dig it back out, dust it off, and plant it in fertile soil where it could grow into something beautiful. And it had grown. It had flourished beyond anything he could have imagined on that hot August day when he spent $17 to buy the freedom of a girl no one wanted. She had been everything he needed, even when he did not know he needed her. And together they had created a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving, and a love worth celebrating every single day. The end.